Hello, this is Daria. Today I wanted to answer some of your questions, and perhaps if you are interested in this kind of video, in this format, we can do a Q&A once a month, and I can go ahead and briefly, to the extent that I can within like a 30-minute video, answer some of your questions that are a little bit more difficult for me to answer in writing because it's just a lot of things to say in a short message or reply as a comment. It doesn't seem worth the time, but when I have a chance to actually talk about this and demonstrate a few things, I think that's a much more beneficial way to respond to you. So today's question is, how do I develop effortless and beautiful arpeggios from beginner to advanced? Before I go on to answer this question, I just wanted to quickly mention that I have already made a long and detailed video on arpeggios, and you can click on it here if you haven't watched it yet, and then you will have more information to be equipped with to understand what I'm talking about in this video, because I'm going to talk about something slightly different. Some things I will mention again, but not as much in detail as I did there. And a second thing that's important in this question is to really understand the terms. What is beginner? What is advanced? And what does it mean arpeggio? Right? Beautiful, effortless, I can assume that all of us have some kind of understanding what that means, at least to each of us. Beginner. It's important to understand because I want to know where you're coming from. So if someone is a beginner, as I just started playing the piano and I understand how the keys work and I perhaps can do something like this type of arpeggio, right? Nice and slow. That's one kind of beginner. And if you consider yourself a beginner and you've been playing for a couple of years and you can already play this kind of arpeggio, let's say, maybe slowly and maybe in a not as graceful as you would like, that's a different type of beginner. So that the effort it will take you to get from this kind of beginner to this kind of beginner is already much different, right? And then same goes for advanced. What does it mean for you, advanced? Does it mean you want to play them at a fast tempo? Does that mean that you want to have effortless technique in terms of touche, a touch, right? You want to be able to play lighter and heavier and all kinds of different types of legato, anywhere in any register, things like that. So that kind of fluidity. Does that mean you want to be able to play in all the keys? Let's say instead of only playing in white keys, right? So for example, C major and C sharp minor are very different in terms of comfort. So, and then advanced, do you want to play double stop arpeggios as well, or just single line arpeggios, two hands, one hand, things like that. So this is just important to define that for each of us, beginner and advanced might mean different things, but I will just talk in general, try to encompass as many different approaches as possible. And hopefully things I'm going to tell you will be applicable for any level at which you are at the moment. Now let's briefly define what arpeggio really means. Simply put, you could say arpeggio is a rolled chord or harmony that is not played as one unit at the same time, like this, another, or something that is in one hand, right? So that's an arpeggio. Arpeggio could be very different one from another because the way we can roll a chord is myriads of ways. It could be short arpeggios, right? Right? Or the short, right? Then you can have a long arpeggio in the same position, but with, let's say, various amounts of stretch. For example, what I mean by position is if you change this, look over the thumb or under the thumb, you change your position. So there are long arpeggios that change position. So for example, this one. And then there could be long arpeggios without really changing position in that way. For example, latitude number 1, right? So I didn't really go over the thumb. I still have kind of stretch, only the stretch, but I don't go over here in that sense. They could be arpeggios passing between the two hands, for example, like that latitude. Then they could be an arpeggio that is not even that long. It could be much smaller, for example. They could be an arpeggio with two hands or a single hand arpeggio. Again, the single hand, like what I showed you in the etude number 1, etude number 24 or 12, opus 25 is two hands. The arpeggios for two hands like this. Also could be arpeggio with double stops, like for example this exercise. I have to search for one. Some exercise here, Brahms exercise 31A. So, right, that's also an arpeggio, but it's very different. So where am I going with all this? I am bringing your attention to the fact that because the types of arpeggios you're going to encounter in music literature are so vastly different, it will require specific skills fingering for each type of these arpeggios. One important thing to understand about arpeggio or any other specific type of pianistic technique is that it doesn't exist on its own. It is a part of your holistic pianistic technique. Arpeggios, as any other type of technique, will improve as your pianistic skills grow in general. As you develop further and further, your arpeggios will become better and better as a part of just overall development. First, here are a few ground points that are important for any kind of pianistic technique and especially important for playing arpeggios. It requires effortless weight transfer between various distances and finger combinations. So unlike a scale where every distance from one note to the next is more or less the same, sometimes of course in this type of minor scale or something, sometimes distances are slightly smaller, slightly bigger. Of course you need to memorize that, but in arpeggios that's much more difficult because there are many different possibilities of what kind of arpeggios you can have. Very important is finger independence, agility, and strength. Like anywhere else, of course, when you play the piano, why it's more important for arpeggios? Because the distances are unpredictable, and for each of them you will have to practice specifically how to go from here to here in this register, from this note to this note, with this finger to this finger, and things like that. So the more agile and more flexible your movements are, the better, the faster you're going to learn each specific arpeggio. Here also goes hand plasticity and mastery of side wrist movement, the side movement of the wrist, and possibly stretches too. So depending on how big or small your hand is, you might need to practice your stretching as well, because certain arpeggios require quite a bit of a stretch, and it's always good to practice stretching your hand. There are certain exercises developed for that specifically. Side movement. Again, I'm a person who uses wrist as one of my main tools when I play the piano. Not all schools, not all pianistic schools use the wrist. But in my world, the side movement is of paramount importance when you play arpeggios, because this is what's going to propel your horizontal movement to the one side and another. Because there's, no matter how small, even if the arpeggio is very small, I'm still going to do a little bit of that side movement wrist. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment, but mastering the side movement is very important. It's, in a sense, feeling of someone pulling you almost by the elbow, by your forearm somewhere, and almost creating that resistance here and then here. And that imaginary resistance, it creates the unity of the line, which is extremely important in playing the arpeggios, for them to be beautiful, graceful, and connected. And another important aspect of mastering arpeggios is having perfect control of your stroke and ability to achieve equality between finger strokes. And again, because our fingers are so different by size, especially these two, right? These three are more or less similar, and these are different. So you need to be able to achieve such mastery of each finger where regardless of the combination of fingers and where you change the position in anything, you have to be able to do it unnoticeably. So we don't hear anytime you have to change or so to avoid this, you need to train specifically those twists and turns, and again, there is more on that in the arpeggio video that I made previously. For the wrist movement, there is also a separate video that I previously made. You can click on that as well. And of course, you need to be able, if you really want to master arpeggios like any other technique, you need to be able to play it in all dynamic levels and touche types of touch. Light arpeggio, like something like this, very different from this, right? Right? I can't play them both with the same touche, with the same touch, the same dynamic. It just doesn't work. They have different meaning. And this is all you will have to develop as you progress in learning arpeggios. And of course, for accuracy of each specific arpeggio, you really need to drill that position with that fingering every time again. Absolutely recommend practicing all keys arpeggios, like C major, C minor, and so on. So one exercise could be where you play all types of triads and 7 chords from the same note. I'm not going to demonstrate the whole thing now. It's basically you start on C, and this, and this. So except it's going to be and so on. You can do it from every key, and then you will learn the fingering that I recommend getting a book with fingering for arpeggios. Hanon, for example, that I have has the fingering for each key for each arpeggio, and then also I'll practice short arpeggios as well, like those in both hands. Try to do the separate one. So these will help you to just generally get these into your fingers, get at least these positions into your fingers. You won't see them every day, but sometimes, yeah, you get a clear C major or C minor chord or F minor arpeggio, and then you don't have to worry about this. You already know that position. But most of the time, composers want to be original, so they will use some kind of position, that a chord that maybe hasn't been used so many times. One chord that you really need to master, especially if you're playing Chopin or other romantic composers, is the diminished chord. Is this, because it's used all over the place, especially in the most tense moments. So I would definitely recommend at least learning the diminished chord from all the keys, and possibly with a couple of different fingerings, because sometimes it doesn't start with a bottom note, it starts somewhere else, and you need to adjust how you approach that arpeggio. You might need to use a different fingering for that. So just being flexible with your fingering for each arpeggio is also a useful skill. Another type of practice you can do for arpeggios is playing them positionally. So instead of playing them, for example, each note separate, you can play them as one chord. And then you can do something like this, for example. Two notes and 3 notes. You can do something that's similar, exactly like the Brahms exercise, for example, right? You most likely are not going to see too many of these arpeggios in literature. That is not too difficult, but if you're in a difficult literature, you might. But it's more about learning. This exercise prepares you to be able to do this. So those are general things that you can do. However, certain things are specific to arpeggios that you might not encounter in other types of technique. I wanted to talk specifically about arpeggio as a gesture and what makes it special compared to others and how to improve that. One thing I recommend thinking about when you play arpeggios is, let's call it a foothold, or could be a pivot. It's a place where you allow yourself to ground your sound, to ground your hand, your finger more, and that have to be the resting point, per se, or the point of arrival. It's where your energy is flowing towards. As opposed to the notes that are in between that may be lighter, those passing towards the bigger note. The idea here is to vary your touch, vary the weight distribution, so you don't have fatigue. I'm going to quickly demonstrate what I mean by a couple examples. Let's say this arpeggio. The short arpeggio in C minor. If I were to play each note with the same amount of weight, same amount of meaning, same amount of pressure, I would get something like this. Even if it was piano. Well, first of all, that is a little boring. And second, my hand doesn't understand where it can rest and how the gesture flows, how the music is going. So I need to give my hand some direction so my fingers can save energy, right? So somewhere I need to save, somewhere I need to give more. And that creates a fluctuation, that creates the beauty and the effortlessness also, both. So it's both beneficial for actual muscles to relax, and also it makes musical sense. So what I do instead is I'm going to make it will depend on the music. If the music, let's say, goes here, right? If I do this, what exactly am I doing? Well, where's my pivot point? Where's my foothold? I'm doing lighter on these, and then here is where I give more, and I relax and kind of restart here. And then again, sorry, I'm actually exaggerating a little bit, but let's say, just for you to understand. And like I mentioned briefly before, imagine that someone's pulling you by your elbow. And that resistance. And then I get, if it's fast, I'm still doing it just a little bit less. And also what I'm doing, I'm slightly also kind of raising my wrist, almost like this. Because I get more force a little bit vertical, almost vertical, right? You could do it, of course, differently. Down like this, but from down is kind of hard here. So I prefer, and the same movement actually is happening in the first etude. Again, you could do down. Some people do down. It's also a matter of grounding. Down is also fine. It depends on what is comfortable for you. I'm showing you the option that I like. You can find your own way of whatever is comfortable for your hand, but the idea is to release a little bit here less, and then release more here, meaning that you give more weight here, right? If I don't release here, then if I'm going to do this, my hand is going to get fatigued in 30 seconds. And this is the key for playing fast and having that long distance quickly, because I know where I can lighten up a little bit, right? I don't need to really do this on every note. It also has to do with, again, effortless weight transfer combined with ability to find places to rest and to pivot, to have a foothold. That's paramount importance. So these two things will really help you along. If you have even an arpeggio with, let's say, like this kind of, right? So here. It could be, the pivot point could be much longer, right? So I could have, for example, here. So here, I go all the way from here. So it's a kind of a bigger motion, but I still have this. So here, I rest in here. And everything in between is still going to sound forte. You don't need to make every note like, you know what I mean? So having that notion that you can rest on these notes and this is where you give, and this is the fluctuation of energy. You control your energy, you control your touch for each individual stroke. Sometimes you would need to have it very light, for example, like this. And it's also very different type of skill to have to go effortlessly between the hands. So here you have to get a feeling that your two hands are working as one wave. Right? Again, here more. Maybe here a little more, and then come back. It's like a swinging motion, swinging pendulum. If you don't find these foothold points, it will be difficult to relax and to feel free with your movements. The second point has to do with connection between individual notes and imagining one long line. Arpeggios are specifically targeting that quick, swift movement across a large amount of keys because you skip a lot, right? So in arpeggio, as opposed to a scale, you don't play every note, you skip at least one, right? And that gives you a faster movement from one end of the keyboard to the other. It will get hindered if you have a lot of stopping points where, not at the points where which you designed to be the foothold, but the random points where your position is difficult to swiftly change. And then, for example, the thumb is commonly the thing that is giving us trouble. Right? So if you have that, you will really be struggling to create one long line. But once you start thinking about this C, for example, I need to go from here to here. Let's see if I can do the whole keyboard here. See left hand. Okay, in the other video I already mentioned that you can practice accenting on different fingers every time. So let's say you do it in 4. That will stop making your arpeggios choppy at the same exact moment. Because depending on how your arpeggios are written in the score, you might need to feel them in 3, in 4, or in 6, or in 8. It depends if you have groups of 6 notes or 4 notes and so on. So usually you want to somehow have that pulsation of those amount of notes within the arpeggio. But regardless of that, overall, you want to think from the last note on the bottom to the top note on the highest note. So you want to make that as one and try to go through all these in between as light and smooth as possible. It's just thinking about this, so having from here to here and to here. It's not every single note. And once you understand that, once you start thinking longer, even if you have something that is a little bit more convoluted in texture, as this, for example, you can still think of that as from here, let's say we end here, right? I'm still, what can help here is take one breath and then exhale at the end. Don't breathe in between. That's one thing. And this is all in your head. You have to be able to hear it that way. And then you can work on separate, let's say you hear, and then you didn't like, maybe hear too loud or too slow or something. What you can do is you specifically train this spot, but you train it in context of the larger, bigger line. Because if you can hide it somehow and then still arrive here, then what's important. So you know what you are going for, what the goal is here. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this was useful to you. Please let me know in the comments if there are any other questions that you would like me to do a Q&A for, if I can collect a few questions this coming month, and I will make another video, hopefully answer them for you. I have a couple more questions that I will answer hopefully soon that I would like to address, but it just didn't fit in this video because it would be too long. And thank you so much for your support again. Stay tuned for more videos. Bye.